The global shipping industry is facing the worst crisis in the history of container freight, and a massive wave of disruptions is ahead. According to the big boss of a major logistics business, Rob Lewis, the operations director of Meacher's Global Logistics, a perfect storm is leaving global supply chains in total chaos as freight rates have just skyrocketed to the highest level ever recorded. This catastrophic mess in global supply chains started during the first rounds of lockdowns when countless businesses were shut down and shipping companies reduced the number of cargo vessels being sent out. However, when stimulus money started to frenziedly fuel consumer demand, global supply chains simply couldn't cope with the unexpected boom in business. Mr. Lewis said the impact of the health crisis on port and shipping operations, along with the shortage of transport, has led to the worst market conditions in the history of containerization. He continued to say, empty containers are in the wrong place, ports are operating below capacity due to the impact of operating with health protocols. This means that vessels cannot get into port at their scheduled times, and when they do, the loading is much slower than before. This is allied with a shortage of haulage. These are global issues. It has become a perfect storm where demand is outstripping supply. These are not minor failings. This is a major crisis, he warned. Several other industry experts are also extremely alarmed with the proportions of this crisis. Amongst them, the CEO of Vespucci Maritime, Lars Jensen, who has spent 20 years studying the industry, recently said that what's going on right now is truly unprecedented. He stressed that the container shipping industry is in a state of chaos that I don't think it has ever been in since it was invented. Economists are also immensely worried about the effects of this crisis on the U.S. economy. They argue that the plumbing provided by the giant shipping containers and the vessels that transport them around the world is currently clogged. As a result, it's getting incredibly difficult and expensive for stores to restock their shelves, while manufacturers, car makers, and builders can't get the parts they need. And farmers, particularly small farmers and ranchers across the U.S., simply cannot afford to export their products anymore. All of these reasons, analysts say, are contributing to a huge jump in consumer prices. But so far, most people remain unaware of the full impact the current shipping crisis will have on higher prices for consumer goods. A leading economist told Bloomberg that companies passing the cost of rising shipping fares straight to customers isn't even the worst aspect of this situation. The effect of higher freight rates on the overall inflation level will be off the charts. And as our leaders have been overlooking this issue, saying it is smaller than estimated, there's a danger we're underestimating the impact, highlighted Volker Wieland, an economics professor at Frankfurt's Goethe University in Frankfurt and a member of the German government's Council of Economic Advisors. At this point, with so much shipping capacity stuck at ports, importers and exporters have been competing for space on scarce shipping containers and vessels and engaging in bidding wars that are pushing the price of shipping sky high. Even big importers who pay for shipping through annual contracts, and therefore they've managed to stay somewhat protected from surging prices until recently, are now being confronted with very painful rate increases as they renegotiate contracts. At the same time, those increased shipping costs and delays are starving the economy of the products it needs and also contributing to widespread shortages. But not only consumers and retailers are being affected, most American exporters are reporting that shipping companies are so desperate to rapidly get containers back to China that they're just emptying the containers and promptly returning them to the Pacific without waiting to fill them up with products made in the United States, Consequently, this is leading millions of small U.S. exporters to the edge of financial ruin and only expanding our ballooning trade deficit. This week, amid continued reports of container shortages, shipping capacity constraints, port congestion, and a sudden uptick in consumer demand, new data released by Drewry Supply Chain Advisors indicated that the cost of shipping goods from Asia to Western countries has exploded to new highs. In 2020, the average port-to-port spot rate from Shanghai to Los Angeles was around $1,500 per 40-foot container. But in the week ended July 8, 2021, that price had soared to $9,631, marking an increase of over 500% from early 2020. From Shanghai to New York, freight rates soared to $11,708 per 40-foot container. But Drewry analysts say it's even worse, saying, "We've heard reports of $15,000 from China to the West Coast and are aware that carriers are charging additional premiums on top to prioritize the loading of a late booking ahead of normal freight all kinds or FAK rate cargoes. This would represent a 10-fold increase from early 2020. Drewry says this phenomenon is a major market shock that likely began shortly after stimulus money started fueling an e-commerce boom in June 2020. Now that peak season on the Asian routes is approaching, Drewry revealed that it expects spot rates and underlying capacity shortages to become even more acute, and rates to get close to $20,000 on some lanes. The difference between this year's container shipping market and that of the last 5 years has become stark as spot rates broke inflationary record after inflationary record, Drewry analysts said in its logistics executive briefing. They added, for low-value products, this unexpected premium cannot be absorbed by shippers. And we know from Drewry shipper customers that some export business is being lost due to these extreme transport costs. In fact, a recent study has shown that those skyrocketing freight costs are having a detrimental impact on small and medium-sized exporters. While the Suez Canal blockage in March of this year intensified other challenges faced by the shipping and logistics industry, small and medium-sized businesses, SMBs, particularly, have been going through a more profound and widespread crisis since the onset of the health crisis and the resulting economic contraction, according to the study. This competitive environment has affected many, but especially all the small and medium business exporters who are burdened by these high costs, it said. The study estimated that this year alone, almost $200 billion in losses resultant from non-shipped products will weigh upon the balance sheets of small and medium American businesses. In other words, the economic boost provided by the Federal Reserve is actually causing our economy to stall, as millions of U.S. businesses simply cannot afford to send their products overseas. After an astonishing $4 trillion in quantitative easing, followed by an increase of $5 trillion in federal government debt, totaling $9 trillion in fiscal and monetary stimulus, only now the Fed is realizing that even though they can artificially create demand, they cannot magically make supply materialize. As Fed Chair Jerome Powell had to admit in recent days. He said, "Turns out it's a heck of a lot easier to create demand than it is to bring supply up." But in the meantime, the life of millions of businesses remains on the line. The truth is that no one knows how this will pan out. The shipping lines are without doubt doing very nicely on revenue, but their operating costs will have also spiraled. It will be interesting to see when the big container lines publish their results how hard they have been hit, or if they have indeed profited from the pain felt by their customers, Mr. Lewis said. For 2020, Drewry analysts predict that rates will be substantially higher than 2019 and that there will be a softening of extreme spot rates, but no return to normal freight rates overall, which means the extreme peaks of the spot rates can get even more extreme in the coming months. And while some of it may be transitory in 2022, the remaining portion of the higher rates will be persistent. Needless to say, U.S. consumers haven't seen the worst of rising prices just yet. Part of the reason why consumer prices have been surging recently is due to a global container shortage aggravated by congestion in several key ports. But another reason why it's getting so hard for companies to find space in shipping containers is that a new virus outbreak in China has led authorities to shut down several key ports, and they've been shut for weeks, clogging several spots critical to global trade, triggering a shipping backlog that could take months to clear and cause shortages during the year-end holiday shopping season. The whole chaos started unfolding last month when government officials in the southern Chinese province of Guangdong canceled flights, they locked down communities, and suspended trade along its coastline in an attempt to keep a new spike of virus cases under control. Although the rate of infections has improved since then, for global trade the damage has already been done. Yantian, a port located roughly 50 miles north of Hong Kong and handles goods that can fill up to 36,000 20-foot containers every day, was shut down for a full week last month after a wave of infections was recorded among dock workers. The port has reopened, but it's still operating well below capacity, and that's creating a huge logjam of containers that are waiting to leave and ships waiting to dock. The Yantian backlog is adding extra disruption on an already stressed-out global supply chain, including the significant seaborne leg of it, as explained by Peter Sand, Chief Shipping Analyst for BIMCO, an association of ship owners. People may not find all they were looking for on the shelves when shopping for Christmas presents later in the year, he added. In other words, as we have been persistently warning in recent videos, Americans are about to experience exceedingly painful years of inflation. The ongoing freight crisis is just one of the many factors contributing to the surge in consumer prices. Keeping in mind that our country is going through the most devastating drought ever recorded, with millions of acres of crops being destroyed or abandoned due to the lack of irrigation water, while commodity prices have been reaching new highs and more shortages are expected to happen in the coming months, food costs are set to explode to levels most people are not prepared for. Meanwhile, numerous industries are still waiting to get the imported products they need to properly operate. And the longer the imbalances between supply and demand persist, the more devastating will be the effects for both businesses and consumers. Thank you for watching. Please post your comments underneath this video and stay tuned for more news from Epic Economist.